my name is Norman, and for 50 years I have been a garden gnome. 50 years! That's a very, very long time to stand still. My job was simple. I had to stand next to a rather rude plastic flamingo and hold a tiny fishing rod over an even tinier pond. Nothing ever happened. The fish in the pond weren't real. The flamingo never said a word. My beard was getting frightfully dusty. Every single day was exactly the same. Stand, stare, wish a fish would bite, even though I knew it was made of stone. It was, to be frank, dreadfully, dreadfully boring. I longed for something, anything to happen. Then, one sunny afternoon, the thing happened. The family who owned the garden, the Pringles, decided to have a picnic right on the lawn in front of me. Little Timmy Pringle, a boy with jam on his face and mischief in his eyes, was reading a book out loud. It was a story about a brave explorer who sailed across giant oceans and climbed mountains so tall they tickled the clouds. He battled sea monsters with wobbly tentacles and discovered treasure chests filled with sparkly, shiny chocolate coins. The explorer wasn't stuck in one place. He was free. He was having an adventure. As I listened, a funny feeling fizzed inside my ceramic tummy. It felt like fizzy pop, bubbling and popping and making me want to wiggle. Why should explorers have all the fun? Why couldn't a gnome see the world? I looked at my silly fishing rod. I looked at the rude flamingo. I looked at the jam-faced boy. Suddenly, standing still felt like the worst thing in the whole wide world. I decided then and there, with a silent, serious nod to myself, that my time as a statue was over. I, Norman the gnome, was going to have an adventure of my own. The idea was terrifying. It was also the most exciting thing I had ever thought. My painted-on smile felt real for the first time. The world was bigger than this small patch of grass, and I wanted to see it all. I wanted to see mountains that weren't just molehills and oceans that weren't just puddles from the garden hose. Timmy Pringle had finished his story and was now trying to see how many biscuits he could fit in his mouth at once. His story had lit a fire in my heart. My great escape would begin that very night, under the silvery winking eye of the moon. When darkness fell, the garden became a completely different world. It was a jungle filled with shadows and strange noises. My first challenge was getting off my little stone perch. It was much higher than it looked. I wobbled, I wiggled, I tilted forward and thump! I landed face first in a bed of very soft, very sweet-smelling pansies. My pointed red hat was now covered in yellow pollen, which made me look rather dashing, I thought. The first step to freedom had been taken. My heart thumped like a drum. I was no longer a statue. I was an escapee. My next obstacle was far bigger and much slobberier. Buster, the family dog. He was a giant hairy beast who snored like a broken lawnmower. He was sleeping right in the middle of the path I needed to cross. I had to be sneaky, as quiet as a worm wiggling. I crawled on my hands and knees, my ceramic joints making little tink, tink, tink sounds on the paving stones. I moved slower than a snail on a lazy Sunday. At one point, Buster twitched his nose and let out a soft woof in his sleep. I froze, my heart in my throat, but he just rolled over and continued his snoring concert. Phew. After sneaking past the snoring beast, I had to navigate the children's play area. It was a minefield. A bright yellow football sat there like a giant sun-colored boulder. A skipping rope lay coiled on the ground like a sleeping snake, waiting to trip me up. I had to tiptoe around a doll that was missing one eye, which was quite spooky in the moonlight. I ducked under the swing set, which creaked above me like a grumpy ghost. It was more dangerous than any sea monster Timmy Pringle had read about. This adventuring business was tricky work. Finally, I reached the garden gate. It was the final barrier between me and the great wide world. It was huge, made of thick wood, and worst of all, it was closed. But then I saw it. A small gap at the bottom just underneath the latch. It was just big enough for a small, determined gnome to squeeze through. I took a deep breath, wiggled my way under, and scraped my pointy hat a little. Then with a final pop, I was out. I was on the pavement, I was free. The garden, my home for 50 years, was now behind me. The adventure had truly begun. Now, you might be wondering, what does a garden gnome want to do with his freedom? Well, I didn't want to find a treasure chest or fight a dragon. My dream was a bit different. I wanted to become a travel blogger. Yes, you read that right. I wanted to see the world and tell other garden ornaments all about it. I imagined writing posts titled, 10 tips for crossing a pavement without getting squished, or a gnome's guide to the most delicious-smelling flowers. I would be famous. Gnomes from all over the country would read my blog and be inspired. My plan was to travel from garden to garden, having small adventures and meeting new friends. I would share my wisdom with them. I'd tell the bird baths how to attract the fanciest birds and advise the sundials on how to be more accurate. Perhaps I could even start a gnome union, demanding better working conditions, like regular dusting and protection from footballs. My secret ambition wasn't just to see the world for myself, but to make the world a better, more exciting place for all the stationary creatures out there. It was a very noble and important mission. I pictured myself sitting on top of a magnificent anthill, recounting my tales to a crowd of adoring ladybugs and beetles. They would gasp as I described my daring escape past Buster the dog. They would cheer as I told them about the spooky one-eyed doll. My stories would be legendary. Norman the Brave, they would call me. Norman the Globetrotter. I would have a little notebook and a tiny pencil, and I would jot down all my important thoughts and observations. My blog would have pictures too, though I hadn't quite worked out how to use a camera yet. My ultimate destination was the Grand Garden Show in the next town over. It was said to have the most spectacular gardens, the most exotic plants, and the most sophisticated garden ornaments in the entire country. If I could make it there, I could launch my blog from the grandest stage of all. It was a long way to go for a little gnome with very short legs, but the thought of it filled me with a fizzy excitement that propelled me forward. Every step I took was a step closer to my dream of becoming the world's first and greatest gnome adventurer and blogger. My journey was not easy. The pavement was a vast gray desert. A bicycle whizzed past me like a silver rocket, and I had to leap into a pile of crunchy autumn leaves to avoid it. I met a grumpy cat who hissed at me, mistaking my pointy hat for a very strange mouse. But I also made a friend. A friendly snail named Sheldon offered to give me a ride. It was a very slow ride, but it was better than walking. We shared stories as we slid along. He told me about the tastiest dandelions, and I told him about the rude plastic flamingo. We traveled all through the night, which for a snail and a gnome is about 3 houses down the street. Just as the sun began to peek over the rooftops, disaster struck. We were crossing a driveway when a giant rumbling monster appeared. It was the milk float. It moved slowly, but it was very wide. To avoid it, I rolled off Sheldon's back and tumbled right into a big green recycling box that was waiting on the curb. Clang! I landed amongst old newspapers and empty bean tins. Sheldon, being a sensible snail, hid in his shell. I was trapped. Soon a big truck came and lifted the box high into the air. Everything tumbled and crashed around me. It was scarier than the snoring dog and the one-eyed doll combined. I was jiggled and bounced and tossed about until finally, the truck stopped and tipped everything out onto a huge moving belt. I was at the recycling center. It was a noisy, chaotic place. I thought my adventuring days were over, but then a kind worker with a bright yellow vest spotted me. "Well, hello there, little fella," he said, picking me up. "You don't belong here." He didn't put me back in the rubbish. Instead, he took me to his little office and placed me on his windowsill, right next to a cheerful-looking cactus in a pot. From here, I can see the entire recycling center. I watch the trucks come and go, and I see all the weird and wonderful things people throw away. It's not the Grand Garden Show, but it's an adventure of a different kind. I may not be a travel blogger, but I have a new wobbly home and the best view in the world. And you know what? I have never ever been bored since.